people who were at the beginning of the trial reporting moderate to severe pain, we reduced that number by 60%. And people who were reporting moderate to severe anxiety were reduced by 75%.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 169 of the Strokecast, Walking with Electric Pants. This episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. As a stroke survivor living with hemiparesis, or left side weakness, I often remind myself that there is nothing wrong with my leg and there is nothing wrong with my arm. The problem is literally all in my head. My brain, because of the stroke, just can't send the right signals to my left limbs, so my limbs don't move the way that I want them to. This is a fairly common issue for folks with stroke, MS, cerebral palsy, and other conditions. But what if you could get a signal to those limbs without involving the brain? Could they move then? Well, they can. We've known this for years, and we've done this for years. It's common to use an e-stim tool or electric stimulation tool as a therapeutic device, where I will just put electrodes on my arm to activate the muscle that makes my hand go up. And there is, of course, an entire field dedicated to functional e-stim, like solutions we've seen from WalkAid and Bioness to help people walk more effectively, or the therapeutic devices from restorative therapies that we talked about strokecast.com/RSI. Psionic takes this technology, though, to really the next level with a new, recently approved FDA device called the NeuroSleeve. CEO Jeremiah Robinson partnered with Fuse Project Industrial Design to build a solution that also not only works, but looks great. And he did it all for a very personal reason. So now, let's meet Jeremiah Robinson. Jeremiah, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
I think this is a really interesting product, and it touches on a whole bunch of cool things, some advances in technology, as well as prioritizing some design elements, which we're seeing more and more of these days. And, I think it's great. I remember one of my PT aides back in the day saying he was thinking about even just launching a whole selection of designer gait belts because some of his clients would much rather have had one patterned in camo as opposed to just sort of the beige hospital color. To begin with, what is the NeuroSleeve?
Yes, so the NeuroSleeve is a leg-worn sleeve that combines the power of EMG and kinematic sensing, so understanding what muscles are firing in the body and how the resultant limbs are oriented, and combines that with functional electrical stimulation of all four major muscle groups of the leg to provide continuous support of gait in the home and home life environment or out in the world. And it really came about for me as a journey with my daughter, who has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. And so some of the things that you said, like, how do you really think about the whole person, their whole experience navigating the world with a disability, and the perception of them as an individual that can often be influenced by the assistive technology or devices that they will or will not use to navigate their environment. And
I imagine, especially as a younger person, how old is your daughter now?
She just turned 13, and cerebral palsy is diagnosed almost at birth. She was born super early, 2 pounds, 4 ounces, and came out not breathing. It's quite common for premature births to have that, but we actually didn't get her diagnosis until about a year. So I've been living with her diagnosis and her progression for 12 years now.
Wow. Cerebral palsy is one of those really fascinating things in our community, especially since what we now know is that roughly half of all cerebral palsy is caused by a stroke in utero or shortly after. And even if not specifically a stroke, a lot of that oxygen deprivation, that coming out not breathing, I mean, essentially that's what's happening in a stroke. We're starving our brains of oxygen. So the CP community and the stroke community are very closely related and have a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And in my daughter's case, it was that oxygen deprivation, and interesting to track how the brain actually starts to protect different parts of the body, starting from the peripheral out. And, with both with stroke and with cerebral palsy, it's a wide ranging set of symptoms. And, we have people within our community on the cerebral palsy side who have feeding and speech issues, all the way through people who you would never have known that they had this event in their life. And there's a big scary name called cerebral palsy, and whenever I tell someone that, I'm so sorry, it's just a diagnosis, and the rest of what her life is about is what's the interesting part.
Most folks, or at least most folks my age, first encountered cerebral palsy just watching The Facts of Life back in the 80s, with the occasional guest appearance of Blair's cousin, a comedian with CP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
And going into age 13, I start talking about style and the perception of your peers. That just becomes more important than perhaps at any other time in our lives.
Yeah, I think in the community as a whole, right, there is this idea of not wanting to be othered. It's the idea of inclusion and accessibility. I think now it's for us anyway, becoming part of mainstream conversation about a continuum of abilities, and that it's not just, well, you have a wheelchair and thus you have access, but it's really about how we can create environments that really help everyone to achieve their goals.
What we've seen over the last, especially 5 to 10 years with the growth of social media, is it's really given an outlet and a voice to more people living with disabilities to go out and participate in the world and to share their story with the world and just generally be more visible, which I think has definitely been a plus, a benefit of the growth of everything from podcasting to Instagram to TikTok to everything else over these past several years.
It's so important, right, to have someone out there who's willing to share what is a tremendously challenging experience, and one that I don't fully live. I only can understand from my daughter and from our users in our communities. But for so long, there was so much stigma, and people were maybe not willing to share this about themselves or wanting to hide it away. And having the courage to go out and share their experience, I think helps to maybe commonize it. We talked about this very early on. My wife also runs a nonprofit for families with cerebral palsy. And so very early on in that journey, we had the conversation with our daughter, are you open to sharing your experience? And now she gives, exercise tips on Instagram for people who have cerebral palsy. And I think we occasionally get these lovely comments from people around the world who said, thank you so much for sharing your story. And, my child sees your daughter and sees themselves in that experience. And, it just makes them feel not alone.
That's fantastic. So, getting back to the neural sleeve more specifically, then, what does it look like? How would you describe it?
So I always like to say, when you watch an NBA game and you see the NBA stars with a one-legged sleeve that looks like it's, providing them some sort of support, we want it to look like that. It looks really like a legging. It is a lightweight lycra-based material. It has electrodes that are woven through the fabric to help supply that stimulation to different areas of the body. And it has a small control unit that it's about the size of a cell phone that fits basically about pocket height. So the idea was it was streamlined enough so that you could wear it under clothes to be super discreet, or if you wanted to show it off, wear it under shorts or a skirt, that it would be stylish enough for that as well.
Nice. So the electronics and the sensors are, like you say, woven into the fabric. One of the things when I see that, when I ever do my e-stim at home, I have to spend a lot of time just making sure I get my electrodes into the right place to make sure they are firing the muscles. How do you make sure that when somebody puts this on, that can it work if the electrode is a centimeter or an inch and a half off of placement? Just as, I know my pockets are never in exactly the same place when I put on my pants.
No, that's exactly right. And that was one of the big design goals as we were starting this project, was to take something that was classically in the mechanical domain, which is, precise placement of electrodes, and moving that into the software domain. So each of the muscle groups has an array of electrodes. So you think of it as a 2x3 grid, and we're able to use software to steer current through those arrays. And so you don't have to precisely place the garment. You have a little interface with just basically what looks like a joystick that allows you just to fine tune the stimulation, and do that, all in software. So it's a pretty quick setup, and our people who are using the device at home pretty much have agency over that entire experience, and don't really have to move the electrodes around. Just put it on, do a quick setup, and then off they go.
So that's interesting. So it's, again, this is to grossly oversimplify it, but it's like if instead of trying to place the electrodes precisely on my arm, I just put like 5 of them there, turned it on, and then just figured out which one was actually working. And that's is equivalent to what you're doing with that joystick and in tuning it when you put it on. Is that sort of an accurate analogy?
Yeah, it's a great analogy. And one of the fun realizations that we had, I mean, I'm a big nerd, computer science graduate, and the technology behind this and the science behind it of electricity and electric fields means we can take a small set of discrete electrodes, and then basically by time slicing which electrodes are on which, you can get even finer grained than saying turn this one on and this one off. You're really actually have an entire field that you can manipulate. And we try to make it, super easy to use behind the scenes, but there's quite a lot of technology and science that went into that.
I know I've talked about other FES solutions on the show in the past, including some of the FES bike, which is commonly used in a rehab facility. How does an FES device differ from, say, a robotic exoskeleton that we see on the news going on to people's limbs to enable people to walk?
Well, firstly, taking a step back, right? So the standard of care within motor disabilities really is hard bracing and physical therapy. And so I am excited for innovations that are happening within the exoskeleton space. And what is interesting about the exoskeleton space is for something that is quite binary, like a spinal cord injury, where they really don't have access to the musculoskeletal system, it's a great solution to get people up, to get people moving. But they're heavy, they're expensive, and they have low battery life. And when you have something like post-stroke or MS or a neurological-based condition like the ones we address, the exoskeleton can almost fight the body, and rather than helping to reinforce neural pathways and strengthen the body and leverage what is already there, it's more akin to something that's replacing that function. And so for what we do within electrical stimulation is we are actually really taking advantage of the fact that musculoskeletal system is intact, and we're almost replacing the neurological signaling on top. So that component of the brain that sequences complex muscle movement. So what does that mean? Well, that means we're strengthening muscle, we're improving blood flow, and in certain cases, and this is what we're most excited to prove out over time, we're actually developing new neural pathways and expressing neuroplasticity for people to gain their own neural sequencing back. And so that's, a super exciting trait and capability of an functional electrical stimulation-based augmentation.
Well, I think that's what's really interesting about this technology is that when we look at something like an exoskeleton for walking or things like that, we're talking about a device that is physically moving the limb and providing power to do that and help with the balance and all that stuff. Whereas a solution like this, what you're doing is you're just sending a very minor electrical signal to the muscle that sort of replaces the signal they might get with the brain. Because I say this a lot, there is nothing wrong with my arm and there is nothing wrong with my leg. The problem is literally all in my head. It's just not sending those signals down there. That's what stroke does. And in this case, you're just sending the signals separately. So it doesn't even require much power. And the actual lifting, the actual movement, it's all done by the body's muscles themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's incredibly appealing and has great ancillary benefits to strength, range of motion, blood flow, and neural repathing.
And I imagine that probably also then makes it easier to counteract the impact of tone and spasticity, often driven by signals from the spine.
Yeah, this is an area of emerging work, both for us and for the community as a whole. So what we often see with cerebral palsy, with stroke, with neural-based motor disabilities is not just the inability to actuate the right muscles at the right time, but tone and spasticity that are activating the wrong muscles at the wrong time and really combating them. And that was something that was very true for our daughter and influenced the design of the system was for her. So we had tried some functional electrical stimulation devices that were aimed at dorsiflexors for foot drop. And it turned out that it was not the right prescription for her. And we only learned that after we started running studies ourselves. And, when I said we combine the sensing system, we really wanted to understand how the muscles were signaling. And so we use surface EMG within our garment, and we share the electrodes that we use for stimulation can also be used for reading this neural activity. And so we can see which muscles are firing when and which ones are spastic or have high tone and which ones are not firing correctly. And so what with her we saw was she was firing her dorsiflexors at exactly the right time, right at toe off. But it was really the firing of the gastroc, a co-contraction of the gastroc that was interfering with that. And so instead of what you would call a classic foot drop, she was really having a co-contraction of the calf that was just fighting the dorsiflexion. And so no amount of dorsiflexion stimulation could combat that. But with the combination of plantar flexion stimulation and dorsiflexion stimulation, her body started to not fire at the wrong time with her calf muscle, but it would actually fire at the right time. And now she had a much more fluid gait. When we laddered that all the way up to the quadriceps hamstring and had all four muscles sequence at the same time, there was this tremendous step change in the benefit for her mobility.
Interesting. So when we talk about that, what you're talking about is dorsiflexion. That is basically the action where we lift our toes and our foot up, and it's an important part of our step. And a lot of folks who've experienced stroke and hemiparesis, we don't necessarily have that ability easily. So our foot drops, so we're likely to trip. In your daughter's case, it sounded like she could lift her foot with no problem. The problem was that her calf and the rest of the muscles were at the same time trying to pull her foot back down.
Exactly. We always like to say when you've met one kid with cerebral palsy, you've met exactly one kid. And I think the same is true with stroke and MS and these other conditions. Is it can be pretty wide ranging, and especially in some of the younger hemorrhagic strokes where you see wide ranging compromises to speech and upper limb function. I'd say there's no easy cases, it turns out, and everybody is so individualized. When we ran our clinical trials on foot drop, one of the things that really became apparent is when you talk about foot drop, exactly what you had described as the inability to lift the foot, even in stroke, where people had grown up and had, a neurotypical learned gait pattern to start with. You were seeing challenges not only with being able to lift the foot, but inversion, eversion. So not being able to control the way the foot tilts to the side. So landing on the outside and rolling the ankle. And so, I think that, there is that complexity across the conditions. And oftentimes with stroke, we see a greater amount of tone and spasticity as well there. And so it's interesting to see all of these conditions really treated in isolation, right? The MS community is not necessarily being treated in the same way as the stroke community, as the CP community, but they're very symptomatic similarities and diversity across all of these.
The MS community tends to get some of the fancier rehab gear. That's what we've seen at our hospitals. I had one neurologist describe stroke as the least sexy of the neuroconditions. So when we're talking about FES devices, you mentioned trying some others. I mean, how does the neural sleeve then compare or differ from the ones folks are more likely to be familiar with, namely the Bioness or the Walk Aid?
There's a few key differences that we focused on in the design of the product. One is the whole leg. Being able to sequence all the major muscle groups in the leg allows for greater diversity of conditions, symptomatic conditions to attack. Second is this software steering. So being able to steer current through the body using software rather than discrete electrode placement. The third is in the form factor, obviously this garment-based discrete wear. And then the fourth is really in this extensible software system. And so where we started out doing gait, now we're doing uphills, downhills, upstairs, downstairs, and really trying to have an expansive portfolio of activities that the sleeve can help with.
Interesting. So it sounds like then it's easier to add other features to it that are software driven as a person continues to use it.
Yeah, and our goal is to open that up. I think about it in the same way, as you think about, maybe the iPhone, right? And so the iPhone was the first cell phone that had an open marketplace of applications. So you got these amazing disruptive things like Waze, where no longer did you need to buy a TomTom. You actually had the app on the phone for whatever, 99 cents or whatever. We have actually worked with a few folks within the physical therapy community to develop new exercises. So we have a set of exercises that are sort of built in and shipped with the system for doing the subcomponents of the gait, toe raises, calf raises, knee extensions. But one of the therapists we talked to said, you know what, this is my approach. And it's really about linking up some of the more complex submovements like push off, where you would be activating the calf muscle and the hamstring. And so we were able to quickly drop in some new exercises and then have a set of options available. We have a set of games that, have been developed to do some of that neural retraining as well. And I think when we talk about how do you try to give options and treat the whole person, having that range of choice can really lead to people finding the right program for them.
When we're talking about this sleeve, then the other thing that comes up when we talk a lot to folks in our community is, I've seen some videos of people putting it on and using two functional hands to do that. How is this for donning and doffing with one functional hand only?
Yeah, so I'll give a shout out here to our industrial design partners at Fuse Project, great collaborators that I've worked with now across multiple companies and multiple projects. And when we got the basic science right of what we were doing, and we were able to demonstrate the efficacy, we said, okay, now it's time to turn it into a product that really is thoughtful about the users themselves and really paying attention to donning and doffing. And so they went out and interviewed a number of folks within each of the disability communities. And exactly what you mentioned was the common refrain in the hemiparesis community is, if this is really a product that is about helping me live independently, you can't make it so that someone else has to put it on for me. And so they spent a lot of time and attention to designing a system that could be put on with the one functional hand. And we've seen some of our users within our trials do it and do it quite well. There's different levels of impact, and it's not perfectly simple for everyone, but there was a lot of thought that went into enabling a one-handed don and doff experience.
So when somebody is wearing this, it sounds like since it's designed for going throughout the day, they're probably going to be wearing it for throughout the day. Is that expected, or is it the type of thing you would wear for an hour or two, or would you just put it on in the morning and take it off in the evening?
So we have about 15 people who have been using it in home trials for the last 3 months. And there's kind of a bimodal distribution there where half of them will put it on first thing in the morning and wear it throughout the day. And then another part of the population who will put it on for task-specific works, like going out for a walk or going shopping. And so we did design around that first experience. It should have an all-day battery life so that you wear it all day and charge it overnight, that it was comfortable, and that also what we call context within our system understood what activities were being performed and what were not. And I'll just give one simple example, and anyone who has maybe tried other FES devices might be familiar with this one. Our system knows when you're sitting down. And so when you're sitting down, it won't be stimulating if you're sort of rocking your foot back and forth. And that was one of the big things that we focus on in terms of making it usable all day, is understanding the context or the intent of the user in those situations.
So, of course, the other big question related to that then is the one that people don't typically think about too much until they encounter it. But so at the end of the day or at the end of the week, I mean, how does this thing smell?
Well, each individual is different, but simple procedure, just spot cleaning with a disinfectant spray is the recommended process for it. And our team continues to work on making it more washable over time. And so, we haven't had any challenges with people sort of saying it's too stinky to wear anymore. And they've been, even in the hot days of summer where people are sweating more, it's been fairly easy for them to maintain.
Oh, that's great. I know as I've been encountering more folks in the amputee community who've described some of the challenges with some of their prosthetics as those things getting pretty funky at the end of the day.
The socks that are and that's one of the things, you just try to make a very breathable garment, and in those cases of the hard prosthetics, it's difficult to get airflow around the limb.
So this is primarily, as an FES device, it's primarily about functional electronic stimulation, meaning that primary focus is on helping you get something done as opposed to it being therapeutic. Now, at the same time, you're providing feedback back to the brain, provide some input from the stimulation to drive the neuroplasticity, as we talked about. So while it's not designed primarily to teach people and to improve people's gait when they're not wearing it, are you seeing results of people graduating from it or gradually moving to less aggressive settings in it?
We haven't seen anyone yet graduate from it, but that's definitely what people, or what we would have as goals for individuals, to increase independence and decrease reliance if possible. And we are seeing evidence of, great improvements in mobility. I'll give you a few examples. So we had one woman, MS, from the MS community. When she came to us, she was primarily using a wheelchair for her, for mobility. And she actually took this, we started her in the trial, and she immediately took it to her physical therapist, and her physical therapist got on board, and they were using the device both in therapy and at home. And she made rapid progress. And I think that, one of the benefits is the more it can be integrated into the continuum of care, the better the results can be. And so she said just last month that she hadn't used her wheelchair in 6 weeks, and she was now walking 40 to 50 minutes at a time. So a huge gain from someone who is primarily wheelchair bound. One of our young stroke survivors goes out and about in the community with the sleeve on, all day wear. He's increased his gait speed by 2x. So wow. A real profound change to his mobility and community participation. And you look at those examples, I don't know what's possible going, this is 3 months in, not 3 weeks, 3 months in. What is possible when we get to 6 months or a year? Maybe there will be a time when they throw the sleeve away, and I think that'd be great.
And even if it's not providing a direct therapeutic benefit, just the fact that it's empowering folks to engage more fully in their therapy or get out in the community and just doing those other things can further drive the recovery of ability experience.
I think at the end of the day, I do want to believe it's having a therapeutic benefit, that it is helping people to gain strength, gain mobility, gain that neural signaling power. We've definitely seen people with increased muscle mass. And as one of the unexpected benefits, we see lifestyle, quality of life benefit is when we have run our home trials and we had people who take one of these validated quality of life surveys at the start. And at 3 months, we saw the mobility gains that we expected, but we also saw some really surprising data around pain, where people who were at the beginning of the trial reporting moderate to severe pain, we reduced that number by 60%. And people who were reporting moderate to severe anxiety were reduced by 75%. And I think it makes sense in retrospect because mobility is such a key metric of independence, and that independence and community engagement ends up being, sort of self-identity. And when we talk to some of the individuals within the community, what we heard from them is every single step I have to think about, every single step I was afraid I was going to fall. And so when I'm afraid that I'm going to fall and it's that much effort, I don't do it. When I don't do it, I'm sitting around it, it's hard to move. I hardly move. And so I think that that really highlights the importance of mobility that many folks who have not had that experience take for granted.
It's exhausting to try and deal with that and know that every step is just that much riskier. That just burns a whole lot of energy that can be better spent doing other things.
Absolutely. One of our participants said, I was out the other day and I was walking for student, and I realized the whole time I was able to think about something else than my next step. And that is exactly what you said. Like that's freedom.
So how did you get connected then with the Fuse project?
I spent most of my career at the intersection of data and the human body. And my prior startup to this, I was building a system that was connecting coaches, trainers, and nutritionists to clients and using gamification to help motivate goal achievement. And I sold that startup to a company called Jawbone, which was making one of the first wrist-worn health trackers. So we were doing step counting and sleep tracking, and really ended up doing some of the early machine learning algorithms for detecting apneas and arrhythmias in data. And Eve Bahar, who is the founder of Fuse, was the chief creative officer there at Jawbone and built some of the amazing, beautiful designs that they had with the Up Tracker, as well as the Jambox, which was an early speaker.
I think I was going to say, I think a lot of folks know Jawbone as one of the early Bluetooth earpieces for cell phones in the mid-aughts.
Exactly. Yep. And so Eve designed those, and I came in and started working with them and the team there, and just have such an amazing respect for their talent and the way they approach design and the marriage of electronics to the human body. And so when we got to that point where we were ready to really productize the sleeve, it was a natural fit.
So when people acquire the neural sleeve, do they have options on the fabric or the patterns or the colors or those types of things at this point?
We have two colors today. One is sort of expected dark gray color, and one is a really beautiful light blue color. And over time, we're going to add more colors and more designs. We designed a really interesting process whereby we could etch the sleeves using a laser, the same laser that we use to cut out the patterns. We can do different patterns in the fabric, and I think it's one of the big opportunities here when you think of it not as your classic medical device. It's not a prison bracelet that you want to hide away. Can we do something where it is customizable and new colors? So we'll introduce new colors, new patterns, and ultimately new form factors too.
Yeah, well, that's what's really interesting, because when we talk about doing this on the leg, obviously the big muscles there, and gait is, of course, incredibly complex, but it's a heck of a lot simpler than using fingers and hands. But the core technology, I mean, theoretically, that could certainly work as an arm sleeve as well.
Yeah, so the progression as we think about it, gait, it was a really natural place to start. One, this is so fundamental as a human movement. Two, it's really well understood. Like, people have been studying gait for a long, long time. So it's easy to understand whether we were doing it right or doing it wrong. It wasn't easy to actually accomplish what we did in terms of the technology. But as you said, the fine motor skills are much more complex, much smaller muscles. And so we think about our current array, electrode array, being able to target, these large muscles with, sort of large electrode pads. Now, to get to the upper arm and to have that same nuance of movement, we'll want to make a denser array. And then more of the data and machine learning that we've used to do context between gait and stairs and these other activities. Now we just can take that platform and start to iterate it up to the fine motor skills.
What I also think is really interesting too, when we're talking about the EMG aspect of this, a couple of years ago, I participated in a study over at UW where they were University of Washington. I know for some reason, folks in Wisconsin seem to think I'm not talking about the University of Washington when I say UW.
I'm West Coast, so I knew.
Exactly. But, where they were using, I believe it was EMG technology with sensors on my arm for me to control a pointer on a screen by just sort of thinking about it. And it was detecting those micro movements that don't actually physically move my arm, but just get those slight tiny signals in my affected arm, and was actually able to detect that and produce a result. And now here I am getting all science fiction-y, because I nerd out on this stuff too, and probably making any of your watchdogs real nervous when we start talking about this stuff. But I start thinking about that. Well, if you can detect those micro movements enough to stimulate the muscles, you could also detect those micro movements enough to use them as an interface. And theoretically, maybe in another 20 years, you could put on a sleeve and type on your computer without moving your hand at all.
Yeah, we see a number of really interesting companies working on brain-machine interfaces. And one of my former colleagues was the CEO of Control Labs, which was a wrist-worn wearable that uses EMG sensing. And in exactly the way that you said it, it was to control a computer interface, a mouse or a keyboard. And what was really interesting to me, and speaks to some of the challenges of working in the medical space, is they had a number of researchers who were like, I would love to use this with the stroke population, with the CP population and others. And, they sort of like pushed into we're going to focus on the mainstream consumer, because we were sort of afraid of regulatory and those populations. And so, we definitely took a different tact on that and said, who needs this technology the most? And obviously it's a personal situation for me, where I was so frustrated by the fact there was literally nothing that could help my daughter. And so we've crossed those hurdles. And so the idea of this as an interface technology for people of different abilities is really interesting. And I talked with an educator here in the Bay Area. I'm based in San Francisco. And, she has many children who are wheelchair bound, and they have trouble, one, operating their mobility device, but also their educational devices. And so if we can find a way to help them both communicate and operate this technology that doesn't require physical movement, it would be an unlock, such a huge unlock for their education potential. Is that they have the brain power. It's just they don't have the physical ability to manipulate the tools. And when you think about all of the neurons and all of the untapped potential that our electrical system in our body has, if we can connect it to these amazing information machines, it is definitely science fiction-y, but it is really exciting.
And it's one more way that those of us in the disability community can help change the world by powering the development of these technologies in their early stages now to help us live more traditional lives that can then ultimately be taken to the next level in the future. Because ultimately, accessible design is good design.
Absolutely. We're all on that continuum, right? And I do think, as opposed to something like Google Glass, right? It came in and you're like, this is maybe really cool technology, but I don't know what the need is. I have a very, very real need within my family, and it's easy to understand whether we're actually delivering on that promise or not.
And that's an important point, is finding a need and going ahead and meeting it. And that's what we teach in sales training. It's all about, you don't lead with just all the cool features and what this can do. You lead with how it solves a problem for your user or for your customer. And that's ultimately what what you're doing with this. You're helping to solve a problem around mobility and around the challenges of gait. If someone is listening and is interested in trying the neural sleeve themselves, or maybe they're a physical therapist who wants to investigate more, is this something we should be prescribing to our patients? How can they go about acquiring it or using it? It's FDA approved now, right?
Yeah, we got our FDA clearance in February of this year, and then we actually started taking pre-orders for early adopters of the technology. And one of the things that is important for me, just having lived this experience with my daughter and having actually purchased out of pocket a number of devices that had promise but ended up not really delivering, is how do we set up something that, one, does make it really easy to try, right? Like, we can't be everywhere, but we can certainly send the device to someone, and if it works for them, then they can continue to use it. But if it doesn't, I ended up paying out of pocket for things that would really just had no money back guarantee, no try before you buy. And so we've structured our program so that it's, this early adopter program is $200 a month, cancel any time if it's not working, so that we're really only paying for it if it worked. And then it's early technology, so we'll be working towards getting broader reimbursement and affordability options over time. And then we have gone and done a number of these in-services with different clinicians. And that's something where over time, while our focus today is very much on that home user, and that, that majority of their time that they are not in a rehab clinic, but connecting the dots. And over time, we will be building a clinical rehab product that allows for this same type of therapy to be done in brick and mortar and then translated back into the home. So a lot of options. Easy to find out information on our website. It's at psionic.com. And there's options to, one, sign up for our early adopter program, sign up for trials, or sign up for an in-service.
Great. And we'll definitely have those links in the show notes because there are half a dozen ways to spell psionic, which is a really cool name though. So at $200 a month for the early adopters, that's actually really affordable compared to some of the other devices that are out there, which can run $5,000-$6,000 for a one-time purchase. At $200 a month, you'd be using this device for 2.5 years before you even approach the cost of some of the other devices. So that is then really affordable. If somebody decides they want to participate in this early adopters program, from the time they let you know and say yes to the time they actually get the device, how long is that running at this point?
Our first devices will ship out this fall, and we're currently taking pre-orders for February right now. So it's a little bit of a lag, but over time, as we get all of our operations set up and streamlined, we'll be able to close that gap. So,
and does it require any kind of doctor or PT referral or prescription to be written for it?
It is a prescription-only device. Actually, I think in a lot of ways that's a great thing. As you said, it's not only the supervision and that is important, but it's also just how it's integrated into the rest of the care. And one of the things, by having these sensors, ability to monitor the condition, we can actually provide some of that data back at the user's discretion to their care team to help optimize their care plan as well. So we haven't seen that to be much of a hurdle. There's such a hunger in this community, both on the clinician side and the user side, to have new technologies available that oftentimes it's just, it's a great first step of getting started in the program is getting that prescription and the buy-in from the clinical team.
And it's great to have that relationship with your therapy team as well. So you can talk and your PTs, your OTs, they want to be a part of your solution and a part of your recovery. And as you build a relationship with them, you'll find if you're somebody who is really into newer technologies and trying new things, you're probably naturally going to gel with a therapist who is really interested in that stuff as well.
Yeah, the way we've been embraced by this community and like I said, that hunger for new solutions and the ideas that they have as to how it can continue to iterate and improve, it's a fantastic relationship all around. I agree.
As you're looking at all this, you mentioned that previous startup was all about sports and gamifications, and again, that intersection between the human body and technology. How did you get into this space to begin with? Did you come in from the technology perspective and added the biology, or from the biology perspective and added the technology, or what drove your interest in this whole big category of enhancing the human experience?
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning. So I grew up in my mother's physical therapy clinic. She was a spine therapist and a small business owner. And so, every day after school, I would go and, help around odd jobs. My dad was a computer scientist. Early on, he worked on supercomputers and he would take me into the office. And, I ended up gravitating towards the computer science side. Have a master's degree in computer science from Stanford, but always had this connection into physiology and sport. I played water polo as well at Stanford. And so there's sort of this continuum of how technology and the human body intertwine. And I ended up working early on at Apple. I worked on the Newton and on handwriting recognition. So this idea of machines being able to interpret a very human behavior, I just fell in love. And then it, sort of the diagnosis of my daughter really just hammered home the fact that it wasn't me. Who was gonna do this? And so, I thought, let's apply these skills and this passion that I have to a very personal problem, which ends up being a very large human problem, with predicted to be about 20% of the population over the coming decades having mobility impairment. And it's not just disease specific or event specific, but just as our population ages, this growing challenge of helping those individuals live a high quality life independently.
It's not really the dichotomy between being disabled and abled. It's the dichotomy between being disabled and being temporarily abled.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
So many of us will be in there, and that water polo background, the family business background. It's like your Captain Jonathan Archer from the Star Trek Enterprise.
It chose me, right?
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about sponsor Modus Nova. I should spend time each day picking up prescription bottles and putting them back down, or fishing pennies out of a bowl of rice, or doing any number of other OT exercises with my affected hand. I should. I know that. But I don't. And I imagine most other folks don't as well. What's much more interesting, though, is playing games with the Modus Hand. The Modus Hand is an AI-controlled, air-powered robotic exoskeleton that helps me play games and get in the thousands of repetitions I need in my wrist to drive recovery through neuroplastic change. As I get better, it challenges me more. If I don't have the strength, it helps me through continual adjustment. At the end of the day, it's those repetitions that drive recovery, and Modus Nova is a great way to make them happen. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code STROKECAST for 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack of the week.
Take the journey one step at a time. And, when my daughter, she'll often get frustrated at that lack of what she sees as perceived progress. But when we can take a look back, and we often will take, videos over time to just say, like, no, the progress is happening, and it is really slow. And I have no idea the level of frustration that she must feel, but by being able to look back and to be able to celebrate what has transpired and the progress that she's been able to make over time, it helps, to engage in that next milestone and the amount of work that has to go on. So I would say patience and capture the past so you can see how far you've come.
That is so important, especially in the early days of stroke. Take as many pictures and videos as you can. And whenever you start something new, take a whole bunch of pictures and videos, because you won't see the progress until you look back at those pictures and videos. So, Jeremiah, this has been fantastic. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Psionic.com, CIONIC, and just a little background on the name. It came from cybernetic bionics, so the idea of biological augmentation, but that was controlled by the mind, and that's sort of the very nerdy origin of the name story. But how we think about our systems as a whole is that they are not, that they are connected to the intent and are able to measure the body and then respond in the way that the user intends and reinforce the biological function there. So that's where to go and find out more. And we're on Instagram and Twitter at PsionicWear, WEAR. And that really is an emphasis of the wearability of our solutions.
Fantastic. And we'll have all those links over at strokecast.com and in the show notes in whatever app you happen to be listening on right now. So, Jeremiah, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic. I love learning about this stuff.
Such a pleasure. It was really wonderful to talk with you, and thanks for digging in deep. It was a fun time.
FES, the technology that Psionic is taking to the next level with the neural sleeve, it's a really interesting technology. I mean, we're giving ourselves indirect control of our limbs. Now, if we combine what we can do with FES with microsensors, then we can really start seeing the possibilities of brain-device interfaces. And Jeremiah and I just sort of briefly touched on this. The things we can do with this technology 20 years from now are really just going to be astounding. Of course, the things we can do today are pretty amazing too. From wanting to help his daughter walk more smoothly to building a solution to help the broader neuro community walk and move is such a great application of FES. And doing it in a way that doesn't scream, "This is an assistive device," gives disabled folks a choice in how they want to appear to the world. There may be times when we simply want to not appear to have a disability. We don't want it to be as prominent. There may be other times where we choose to show up as a person with disabilities and not care what anybody else thinks. I'm not saying either of these perspectives is right or wrong. Personally, I'm more inclined to just show up as myself and not hide my disabilities, but there may be times when I don't want to do that. What I'm saying here is that we should have this choice. And up until now, we really haven't in the same way. And choice is a key element in all this. I and my guests choose to tell our stories publicly on this show and on other shows. We choose to share our adventures with others. And not everybody wants to talk about their stroke story. And if that's you, that's okay. You do you. There is tremendous diversity in this community, and there is no right or wrong way to do stroke life. Jeremiah's inspiration, his daughter, Sophie, has chosen to share her story too. And you can see a bunch of her tips and messages for other youngsters and oldsters with CP and other disabilities on the Instagram account she maintains with her parents. You can find a link to that in the show notes. In other news, many survivors are likely familiar with the company Saebo, S-A-E-B-O. They make all sorts of rehab and assistive gear. One of the things that they make is an alternative AFO. They sent me one a few months ago, and it really became my summer AFO for days when I don't want to wear long pants. One of these days, of course, I'll get around to editing and publishing the video I made about it. But Saebo recently started their own podcast as well, and they invited me to be on episode 6. It was a good discussion about my journey and the good, bad, and ugly in rehab today. So to learn more, be sure to check out the No Plateau podcast, which is a great name, by the way, in your favorite podcast app. Or just head to the show notes in this episode for the link to that podcast appearance and plenty of other stuff. Towards the end of that episode, I actually do get kind of ranty too, which is always fun. But that's it for this week. To learn more about Psionic and the neural sleeve or how you might try it, head on over to strokecast.com/electric pants for all the resources we talked about. Send this episode to someone you know by giving them the link, strokecast.com/electric pants. Go ahead and share a recent win you've had in recovery, whether it's big or small, by calling 321-5-STROKE. That's 321-5-STROKE, and leaving a voicemail anytime, day or night. And, of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.